Welcome to Surviving the Black Church podcast, where we shed light and bring awareness to religious trauma and dismantle oppressive systems within the Black church.
On this week's episode of Surviving the Black Church podcast, Jonathon, Hugh, and Nikki are recapping Season 1. This episode will culminate the first season of Surviving the Black Church podcast. This episode, the crew discusses how the topics from Season 1 have personally impacted us. We also are giving some shout outs to the listeners, both domestic and international. We get pretty candid about the topics, about the process, and about the future. So please join us for the conclusion of Season 1 of Surviving the Black Church podcast.
The Surviving the Black Church podcast represents the views and opinions of Jonathon Carrington, Nikki G, Hugh Kelly, and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as clinical advice. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establishes a therapist-client relationship. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any clinical questions. Hello, my name is Jonathon, and you are listening to Surviving the Black Church podcast. And I'm with my co-hosts, Nikki G and Hugh.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, y'all.
All right, so this will be our final episode of Season 1 of Surviving the Black Church podcast. And in this season, we've been diving deep in our personal experiences, as well as the lived experiences of Black folks who may have faced the challenges of religious trauma and or abuse in the Black church. And through means of this platform, we've provided a space for support, for healing, for clarity, and understanding. And so for this episode, we're just going to take a moment to pause and reflect on our journey and impact that we've been making through the podcast and how it's impacted people so far via our listeners and ourselves. So this has been a journey for all of us, right? And in terms of how we understand religious trauma and how religious trauma has impacted our understanding of spirituality, of religion, and faith. And at least for me, I think I've come to realize just, how powerful religious institutions and systems can hold over the lives of individuals, particularly Black lives, and how that power can sometimes lead to very deep wounds. And us talking through this and us talking about it has allowed me to ask more questions in the ways that not only we can address the issue, but also how can we support each other as we heal and transform our perceptions and transform our thinking as we deal with our own traumas and continue to acknowledge the harm that occurs in these spaces. And so this episode is just an opportunity for us to just really reflect upon the previous episodes and to share our personal experiences and insights with you all. And hopefully we can have meaningful discussion as we reflect and recap. And also this can be a means of providing closure for this season of the podcast on religious trauma in the Black church. So I just wanted to do a brief recap of all the episodes we've done so far, and then bring in my co-hosts, Nikki G and Hugh, for us to kind of talk about, go into a discussion about all the episodes and the work that we've done so far. So episode 1, we introduced this podcast to you all, Surviving the Black Church. And in this episode, we really just talked about the importance of bringing awareness to issues occurring in Black churches. And we also talked about, why we decided to create this podcast of this nature. And then in episode 2, we talked about religious trauma. Like, we really got deeper in talking about the positive and the negative impacts that religion can have on our lives. And we discussed how the strong religious and Christian orientation within the Black church that can really have both positive and negative impacts on the Black community. And then we talked about a little bit about our own experiences with religious abuse and trauma. And then we went into kind of having more conversation around, like, what is religious abuse? What is religious trauma? What does it look like? And we talked about some of the symptoms of trauma and the long-term effects of religious trauma. We also talked about church hurt and how church hurt is used interchangeably within the context of religious trauma or spiritual abuse. And that led us into talking about, how church hurt is not the same thing as religious trauma. And we kind of broke that down a little bit more. Then we just talked about other things such as denial and abuse and defying the lie and coming to terms with the truth. And how do we deal with religious trauma and Black grief? And among other topics that we discussed. And then we continued to talk about other things such as, love bombing and respectability politics and playing nice, and talking about how religious abusive leaders show up in their churches and some of the traits and characteristics that are played out oftentimes in religiously abusive leaders in the Black church. We talked about how narcissism impacts religious leaders in the church and some of the similarities between narcissism, having narcissistic families, and how narcissistic family breeds narcissistic leaders, particularly narcissistic religious leaders, and how those churches are played out in those with those dynamics. And then we just continue to talk about narcissism and how it has impacted us as a people, and how the religious abuse has become a norm in the Black church, and how we've normalized abuse, particularly religious and spiritual abuse. And then we talked about went deeper into that in terms of how the normalization of abuse and how insidious it is, and how so many people are suffering in silence and ostracized if they do speak up. And then after talking about the negative effects of religious abuse and how we've normalized abuse in our community and culture, we talked about the coping mechanisms that occur after religious trauma. And we delved into like maladaptive and adaptive coping mechanisms and what they might look like within the Black church after experiencing religious abuse and trauma. And we continue to talk about maladaptive coping mechanisms through talking about mental health stigma and its association with the Black church, and talked about how stigma is so vast within our communities, which is why it limits us in talking about mental health and getting treatment. So as you can hear, just in our recap in this season, we talked about a lot of different things and kind of, just talked about the nuances and the complex dynamics of how religious trauma and abuse shows up in the Black church. So it's our hope that this season really provided you with enough content to give you enough information to kind of sit back and really reflect, as we're about to go into this reflection on how our experience has been with talking about some of these issues. So I'm just going to pause here and just give us a moment to just talk about how this podcast, Nikki and Hugh, has impacted you and the way that you've gone about it. And maybe we could just, take a moment just to talk about some of those things. So whoever would like to share first, go right ahead.
Yeah, like just listening to you review all the episodes, I'm just like, wow, we covered a lot over this past season. We went deep, and these are just the tip of the icebergs of topics that we can discuss when it comes to religious trauma and what it looks like in the Black church. But I just want to start off thanking the listeners, thanking you for your consistency. We see the amounts of downloads we get. We see some of the feedback, the rating, subscribing to the podcast. We're newborns in this field right now, but we are appreciative for your diligence to connect and come along on the journey with us as we're discussing these necessary topics. The content of this podcast not always light and airy like some other podcasts are, although we appreciate those. But we knew in our hearts, all three of us, that it was something that needed to be done. We realized that there's too much abuse and trauma happening within the Black church, and not enough voices out there as of yet to really start to, as I always say, pull back the curtain and discuss these things. When we've come to you and we sit behind the microphone, we're coming as survivors ourselves. We're coming as peers. Yes, we have our professional credentials and things of that nature, but we're survivors at the end of the day. And we still are individually working through our own traumas and our grief and the things that we still see that are plaguing many of our people. So, we're by no means experts in any of this, but our hearts have been moved for some time to want to even broach this whole topic. When I look at the intro to Surviving the Black Church, we talked about how we met. We talked about, our passion to see our people really have options. Some of us were born into a lot of these things. Some of us generationally, we didn't know any better. This is all we knew. And to talk about and talk to our people about the different options to really say, hey, this is what you've experienced, but that doesn't make it right. This is what you've seen. This is what you were taught, but that doesn't mean it's actually accurate. And to actually pose questions to the listeners, to ourselves first. Because usually before we actually hit record, we talk amongst ourselves and around the topic and just what it's like for us. But we pose questions to ourselves and to you to really sift through some of the material and say, wow, did I know that? Was I aware of that? And do your own research and, perhaps connect with a mental health professional or talk to someone that that might have experienced this. Or if this has not been your story, but someone who's experienced religious trauma, to look at them differently, perhaps, to have a little bit more awareness so that we can have more compassion for survivors. Because oftentimes within the Black church, and I'm just going to be real, we judge those who have to leave. We ridicule those. We claim that, God is basically done with them, or they've been given over to the enemy's devices and things of that nature. Very often people don't take the time to really explore and find out what happened to sister so and so. Why did she leave? What happened to the choir director? He just up and left. We don't know what happened, and we hear rumors. But how many of us actually take the time to go and reach out to that person to see what happened? And if you do, a lot of times you'll find that some people have been through a lot of abusive experiences. So, this is why we created this podcast. Like we said in the very first episode, this is why we've done the work to speak to you all and to hopefully pull back the curtain so more who are suffering in silence to know that they can know that they're not alone. So I'll just kind of start off that way and say that and say thank you again. We look at the stats not because we're stat driven, we're passion driven, we're driven from the heart. We're driven from a place of providing tools and resources and education for our people. But I love the fact to see how the podcast has been spreading as far as the different locations. And it's amazing to see how many places are actually tuning in and checking out Surviving the Black Church podcast. I mean, obviously, the United States is the dominant force here, but we have listeners in the UK and Australia. We have listeners in Canada and France, India, South Africa, even Turkey, Switzerland, Ethiopia. We see you. Ireland, Virgin Islands, and even Mexico. So we are grateful to you. If you're listening to this end of the season episode, we see you. Thank you for connecting with us and listening in. But I think my most impactful episode, I would say personally for me, I have three. I think the Church Hurt versus Religious Trauma series, the part one and part two, has religious abuse become the norm? And the coping mechanisms after religious trauma. Those three really, it wasn't just me participating with the guys and pouring out. It touched me as well, preparing for those episodes and just realizing that, for the church hurt versus religious trauma episode, there's so much misinformation out there in our Black churches, and that misinformation continues to perpetuate the normalization of religious abuse in our communities. And so we came humbly to that topic, understanding that for some, church hurt, that terminology is all that they know. It's something to grab onto. But I'm glad that we were able to provide a little bit of education behind, the terminology church hurt and sometimes how it is used to spiritually bypass what's really going on. So that topic was very near and dear to my heart. Religious abuse being normalized in our churches has another one that hit the heart. I think particularly in the area when I talked about how it's affecting adolescents. I mean, if you've been an avid listener of the pod by now, you would know that I have a special place in my heart for the young people, for the teenagers, and even the young adults who have been experiencing this and they've had no outlet. They can't really talk to mom and dad about it because mom and dad are part of some of the religious abuse that they're experiencing. And, I get very passionate when it comes to that topic. And so for me, that was very, I don't know, it just touched my heart in a deeper way to be able to express that. And I hope some teenagers, some adolescent, even young adult out there felt heard and seen when we talked about that as well. And yeah, the coping mechanism, I think that one probably hit me on a personal level even more because prior to us recording it, it was personal. And even after us recording that episode, some things came up where I had to say, okay, Nikki, okay, what coping mechanism are you operating in now? Is it maladaptive or adaptive? Let's go back to what we teach. Let's practice what we teach. And so that really spoke to me as well. And I would say my honorary favorite one is the one we just recently did, the mental health stigmas in the Black church. Again, that's another area I feel very passionate about. But all in all, I really appreciate, being able to talk about these deep topics with my boys, Jonathan and Hugh, to be able to be supported and encouraged in our own personal journeys as we collectively come together, the power of the collective. I appreciate you guys. I thank you for all your hard work and preparing for these episodes that we've done. And I'm grateful to be able to be here to just be a service to our people in this time. So I'll just pause for now and just say that, but I'm pretty sure I have more to say in a few. So Hugh, you got anything for us?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, this podcast, I was just thinking a lot this week, like what this podcast has meant to me. And like for me, this podcast has been kind of a meet point. I think of this as like a meet point of our experiences at a very specific moment in our lives. And I think in a very specific moment in our listeners' lives. I feel like we've been huddled in an intersection, like, sort of after a car accident. And, we're sort of piecing together the pieces of the wreckage. And so, I just feel like we're gazing at the shards and the flames. And, we're not only putting out the fire that has occurred in our lives, that has occurred in the church, but we are actually burning our own flames, burning our own embers that make us shine brightly. And so this podcast has been so significant in me and my life, and I really do hope that it has also impacted our listeners. And I just I kind of want to ask the listener, like, what does this podcast mean to you? My personal favorite episode has definitely been I did really enjoy the mental health stigma episode we just did, specifically because it's a very, very, I think these intersections are very, very, they're kept apart from one another, and I don't feel like they need to be kept apart from one another. I feel like that's where the confusion starts, and that's where the we just really can't put together the pieces of the puzzle. So that was probably one of my favorite episodes because it really, and I'm going to selfishly say that it really helped me put a lot of components of my own healing journey together, even in just the week that we filmed that and put that out. So I am so excited for season 2. I can't wait. I can't wait to meet at this new meet point. I can't wait to be able to move forward. And I can't wait to kind of uncover, our journey and I don't want to use the word recovering, but I'm just going to use the word recovering from, healing from these extraordinary traumatic experiences and traumatic lives. And being able to kind of forge a new path. And so I am just grateful to have met both of you. And I am so, every time I talk to you, it doesn't matter what we're talking about, I just feel I feel this warmness in my body. And I'm very aware that this is very special. It's not something that happens every day. It's not something that happens every year. We went our entire lives with not going on this journey. So this is something I think this is something that's really special, and that I think that is very, very. I will fight for this podcast. I love this podcast. I love y'all, and so this podcast, I could blabber on more and more and more and more, but this podcast has been a meet point for incredible stories, that where I truly believe healing has occurred. So I just want to give thanks to this podcast. So that's all.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing that, and I'm just so grateful to be part of this as well. I think one thing I wanted to share with both of y'all is that it took a lot for me to come on this podcast, on this project, and the reason why was because I was like really resistant in going back through the wound and talking about the wound. If you understand what I'm saying here, is before we started doing this podcast, I have gone, let's say it's been 8 years of silence, of not saying anything. I left the environment and I was like, I'm done. I don't want to ever deal with it again. I don't want to talk about it again. And so when we started talking about the episodes, I started reopening the wound all over again. And I was like, I promised myself that I was going to shut that door and just never speak about it. But I trusted the process. I trusted you all. And I'm the type of person that, I love hard. And I think people that are listening to this may have the same experience where we probably gave a lot. We gave our hearts to these institutions. We gave a lot. We gave our hearts, our minds, our spirit, our soul. We gave everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
didn't receive the same back. And it's not like we expected it, but it was, if you know what I'm talking about, if you are a person that just loves hard, you love on people hard, you're a giver, you're giving and giving of your heart, and you have this big heart, and your heart grows and evolves and it grows without needing to be full because you were born that way. And you pour. That's all you know. That's what you know how to do. You pour into people, no matter if it comes back to you in return. That's me. But the truth of that is that loving so hard hurts. It hurts like hell.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts. And that heartache, that heartbreak, that heartache that I felt after separating from that experience, after giving all of what I gave, it hurt me. And this podcast seemed like it was picking up the pieces for me. Every episode, every time we would do a podcast, it was putting together the puzzle pieces of the fragmented parts. Because I didn't think that would even happen for me, but it did. Particularly in the episode when we were talking about love bombing, and I saw myself. I saw when we were talking about before we joined the church and what that was like, when we met the church leader, when we met the church, when we first made contact with the church, what was that experience like? And how the allure and the attraction on both ends, and how unconscious I was not awake. I was not connected in that moment. I just gave. I had no interest in receiving anything. I just gave. And how that was to my detriment. How it was to my detriment. So after talking through that, after processing that with y'all safely in a safe space, it really healed me. And I started crying. I was getting emotional because just like many of y'all that have been listening to this, it's just like you listen to it and it's like, where have been the words to describe this experience all along? Because if I can't, I can't go to church about it. I can't go to a mental health professional that understands what it's like to experience religious abuse or religious trauma, and they don't have any. Where can I go for the information? And I feel like these episodes filled the gap for me to be able to give me that clarity, understanding of what it was that I went through and what it was that I was going through that I wasn't able to get anywhere else. To put words to the feeling of heartbreak and hurt and betrayal and mistrust and all the negative feelings that I was having towards it, the anger, the justifiable anger, all those things this podcast provided a platform for me to speak to my wounds, to speak to my inner child, to speak to those parts in history that I closed up, that I suppressed, that I didn't want to talk about, unlocked all that stuff that was trapped up inside of me, that was keeping me held hostage because I was suffering in silence. I didn't have the words to explain what I was experiencing. All I thought in my mind was just like, this is injustice. This is not fair. How is it that I could go through life and experiences? And I'm asking God these questions. I'm asking my creator these questions. How can I go through these experiences and you're allowing me to go through them? I had this anger towards God for a long time before I came onto this podcast. But I think after talking about it, at least for me, has lessened that anger a little bit more for me, to open up a door, open up a window for me to kind of address my unbelief, to address my belief systems, to even question just some of the things that I've been I've made up in my mind about religion and faith and spirituality. It did all of those things. And so even just the truth about just loving hard, despite all of the traumas and the hardship and the pain and the loneliness and the emptiness and the voids that I experienced all along, I have found some meaning and purpose behind those things by talking with you both, by coming on this and coming back to these episodes and not invalidating what my experiences have been in the past, but just making sense of it. It's because for a long time it didn't make any sense. Like I couldn't put anything to it. I just had a lot of feelings. And so I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your service. I appreciate both of you having the ability to be vulnerable and to trust in me enough to do this, because there's not that many of us that are doing this. Okay, that's another thing. It's like there's not that many of us that are courageous enough and brave enough to go there.
Yes.
And have the honest conversation about this particular topic. People just leave and don't talk about it. Generations and generations and generations of people just have been silent. But we have been courageous enough to step forward, to stand, even if we are standing alone. Even we have families that may have heard a lot of what we have shared for the very first time in life. But we decided to take that step and speak up. So I take my hat off for both of y'all, because that's courage, you know? And so that's
Yes,
something that's serious. So I just want to kind of pause there and let that sit for a second.
Oh my God, Jonathon. Oh my God. When you said I was angry at God for so long, I have been able to, that's something else on this podcast. I have been able to kind of repair my relationship with God through this podcast. I have uncovered, so much. I have been able to repair my relationship, or not repair. I don't know if repair, but I have been able to start the process of repairing, my relationship with spirituality. It's been a long, time coming. It's been a long time coming. A lifetime, a literal lifetime for me personally. Thinking that was something that would be possible after these experiences that I would be able to to even think about, to even actually start doing, to start putting words to start putting meaning to start putting, as you said, a purpose to, right? And that relation, the repairing this relationship, it like, I'm just getting emotional now because that is so significant, and that is one of the most treasured things, I think. One of the most treasured things that I think has come out of this podcast, for me, and doing that in the company of y'all is that doesn't happen often. That's not something that I think should be glossed over. It truly doesn't. Like you just said, it takes a lot of courage. It takes more courage than you even think. You don't think you have it in you, and you actually have it in you. And so I feel like, we're the, I'm, thank you. I'm just going to stop because I am going to ball up.
It's okay, Hugh. If you want to cry, it is okay. Vulnerability actually is a superpower for us, whether, people realize it or not. I think, it's showing authenticity, and, we love that,
Thank
especially
you.
when it comes
Yes, it is.
around these topics. Let the tears flow. We have been conditioned for so long as a people to withhold and suppress our emotions, and we need to release, y'all. We need to be able to release in a healthy ways, obviously, but I'm so happy to hear that, Hugh, that through the prepping and the conversations and then the recording of these episodes, that it's helped you in a way of feeling closer to God and closer to spirituality and being able to touch these things. And I think you expressing that is an example of what happens, y'all, when we as a people stop stuffing things and hiding things and bringing it out and putting it on the table and talking about it. It's
Yes.
actually healing when we come together in love, and not with our guard up, like, we're ready to judge each other, but we're here to say, hey, this is my experience. This is what happened. And then Hugh says, hey, this is what happened with me. Jonathan says, yep, this is what's happened with me. And we're able to love each other through it and cover each other through it and encourage each other through it. This is an example of what can happen. You know, um, Unfortunately, that's not what we've seen a lot in our kitchen tables, in our homes, in our family of origin. That's not what we've seen in the churches that we grew up in and we might still be in 20, 30 years later. We're still there. We've not seen that modeled much. But, part of the purpose of this podcast is to talk about it, to break these generational cycles of silence, to break these generational cycles of religious abuse after religious abuse, compiled with narcissistic abuse, compiled with all the external things that we do, that we experience in our families, as a people, from systemic racism and all the things, all that intersectionality. We got to talk, y'all. We got to sit down at the table and have real discussions on how it's impacting us. Capitalism and all the isms and all the external things that are so much bigger than we are individually encourages us to just push and to press and keep going and learn to move around that pink elephant in the room, move around the many pink elephants within the church, and just let's pretend that it doesn't exist. And if it didn't break you, you're okay, keep going. We got to throw that away. That's not productive to us individually. It's not productive for us as family units. It's not productive for us as a people, right? I mean, obviously, we are talking on a focused way about religious abuse, about religious trauma. But a lot of these things we discuss can be applicable to the many things that ail us in our community. And, I hope this generation is one of the generations that's saying, I'm not about to be quiet about this. This happened. This was real. And you're not going to gaslight me to make me feel like it didn't happen. You're not going to find 20 scriptures to justify what you did. It was real and it happened. And I'm going to speak up, you know, and not just speak up to rage against the machines. A lot of times that is indeed necessary component. But then to do what we've been doing on this podcast, just talking about it, right? Just talking about it to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. Many of the listeners, many of us in our own, before we even met, we were carrying a lot of the shame and the pain and the voices and the words and the events in our bodies, silent, just moving through our careers and moving through relationships and just saying, well, that was 10 years ago, it is what it is, but it's still showing up in a lot of what we were doing. What would it look like if there was a podcast, if there was a table, if there was an event, if there were resources that speak right to us, by us, for us, to say you're not alone? And this is what we are, the three of us have been attempting to do with this podcast. Season 1, we've got more to come in the future. We're working hard to try to see what else we can offer to our people who, especially the survivors of this insidious abuse, but being able to talk. Jonathon, you said something about being courageous and stepping up to the plate and being able to touch these topics. And we say this humbly. This is not some award. We're not looking for awards for the podcast. We're not doing it for stats and notoriety. We are doing this because we care, because we're survivors, because we see the need. There's a lot of reasons as to why. But that courageous part is very important. I have been carrying something like this podcast in my belly for years. Had desires, had ideas, but it wasn't time. And I'm so glad I was able to meet the two of you, and we just started to exchange thoughts and experiences and realize this is it. This is the crew, this is the time, and this is the medium, the Surviving the Black Church podcast. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we can be somewhat of a resource and a vehicle for many to start putting those pieces of the puzzle together to make sense of the events you've experienced. But that courage takes a lot to touch these topics. Our people, let me tell you something. When we believe something and we are connected to something, sometimes almost tethered to a thing, to a system, to an institution, to a belief system, when someone comes around and is not necessarily saying, hey, get away from that, leave that. All we're saying is, hey, examine it, probe it, evaluate it, judge it. And I'm not talking about judging the way some people say, that folks do when they're trying to figure out what happened. But judge it and evaluate it and start to critically think about it. You can get a lot of tomatoes thrown at you, so to speak, when you do that. And we realize that the institution of the Black church is such an important part of the history of our people. And many great things have occurred within the Black church, like we said in the beginning of the first episode. We realize the brilliance of what the church had become during the most crucial times in our lives as a people. But we also realize what it's been for others in that fashion has not been for some who have experienced religious trauma and abuse. And that's why we're here. And this is what this podcast exists for them. And for those in the future, unfortunately, that might experience it later and can come back to this as a resource. But I can say personally, this took a lot of courage. I put a lot of my personal life out there, and this is something that, I kind of kept close to the heart, but just have a desire. But I knew it was time. I feel like I got an okay from my creator to actually tap into this and to be a vehicle to encourage others. And so I'm just grateful. And this is not the end of our journey, we're just pausing so we can continue to heal and we can focus on some things in the background and we can continue to build so we can increase our resources to survivors in our community. So I'll just pause right there and throw it back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And all the shares that have come forward so far. There's, religious trauma survivors are very beautiful people. They are, because we are the ones that can give away love, knowing the cost and consequences of that. And we can give ourselves away knowing that we can have our heart ripped out at any time. And I say that because for a long time for me, like I felt like there was always something wrong with me because I could not do what God wanted me to do, could not change, could not alter. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't being enough for him. And there was there was immense amount of guilt associated with that because I was always trying to do more, give more, give more of my heart to God, even with the belief that I I had that he did not love me. And it's podcasts like this that where I keep coming back to that this willingness to walk up to the line again and again and again. Just to place a little bit of my heart in at each and every episode, just sharing this. We come back to religion. We talk about faith. Think about it. We come back to spirituality. I didn't want to talk about no faith, spirituality, or religion. But there's this internal motivation to keep coming back and walking up to the line. That's pretty bold. And whether I'm still in the church or not, I know that boldness still resides within me. And it's not insanity. It's not crazy of me to think to come back to that. It's a life that is brave because I know in my heart, my heart, even though I'm not in it anymore, that I'm not scared. I don't live in the fear.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't live in that fear. And maybe I should. Maybe I should just not talk about it. Because I know a lot of people probably are thinking that, oh, I don't want to talk about this. I'm done. I'm done. So maybe I shouldn't talk about that. But knowing in the heart of your heart, the deepest crevices of your heart, that there is still this need to show up. And for me, it keeps coming up. It keeps bubbling up. It keeps wanting to be said. The vulnerability, awaiting to experience love again. And I can't shake it. I can't shake it. Y'all, for the longest time, I didn't feel love like I could be loved by anything or anyone or anybody. But I have it in me to love. So that doesn't make me unlovable. It makes me seen.
Yes.
It makes me
Yes.
seen. I am visible. I am seen. Yeah, maybe I joined the church and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and it ended up being a very traumatic experience. Yeah, I may have left and never talked to the people again that I was in that environment with. And I felt really bad about, very guilty about not ever disclosing with them, my departure. But nobody is perfect in any relationship with anything, whether it be a church or a church member or anything. But there's always that line. There's a line. There's a line. And I can always walk up to the line and know that there is something that I can approach. There is a problem. There's an issue. There is a feeling, a thought. I can always walk up to the line. So for me, I think that willingness to love and to share love, that part of me that keeps coming up, that will always be there, is the fuel that keeps me going every single day. It fuels the light that resides on the inside of me that no one can take away. It brings light to the darkness that still resides within me every single day. Is that love? Is that light? And if you want to be in company with me, you have to accept that love, that light, as well as the darkness. I can always make another choice. That's what I'm learning about this podcast. I can always make another choice. Now I'm a little bit more specific and particular about who I give my heart to, because of what? Boundaries and limits. Because of the line.
Yeah.
Because of that line. I will always be at the line. I will fight for the line.
Mm-hmm.
Because the line is on my side. Because if there's
Yes, it
anything
is.
that I believe right now, I might not believe in what I've been told and what I've been taught. There's anything that I believe, that there is anything that I should strive for and that I should focus on and set my intention on, is that of love. Is that love? So I say to those who are listening, every single day and every single moment is a precious moment, a precious day. If we are holding back because there is fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of giving ourselves away, just know that you're not alone, because there is love in every single one of us that is listening to this podcast, that is taking in the material. And just trust and know that if you've never heard any other podcaster or person who has shared, just know that love is still there. It's still there. Go for it. Go for it. Nurture it, protect it behind the line. Always choose love. At the end of the day, always choose love. I have a question for you both. Was there any one, just from the material that we've been presenting so far, was there any insights that have emerged from conversations, from listener feedback, or anyone that wanted to share about that would be helpful for this discussion? Can speak to that or anything that I've shared so far.
Well, I was going to say something before you asked that question, just kind of piggybacking from what you just shared, but wanting to encourage listeners, as we take our break, And if you find that you are revisiting some of the previous episodes, or you're continuing to educate yourself about things dealing with religious abuse and trauma, um, you know, to continue to be compassionate towards yourself, to continue to believe that you are worthy enough to tend to those wounds that have been inflicted on you by leaders, by teachings, by spiritual mothers and fathers, by different so called prophetic voices that have blared things over the microphone directed at you while you were sitting in the service, just there because you needed a touch from God. Instead, you were met with vitriol from a leader who was angry because you didn't comply to their wishes about something. Like, those wounds are real, and you are worthy enough to say, "Hey, I I can't ignore this anymore. I don't want to ignore this anymore. My needs matter. My hurts and pain matter. I'm tired of ignoring this." Um, you are worthy enough. You matter enough to get the help that you need to get through this next season of your life. So I know we're taking a break, and again, I might be reiterating things I've said or we've said throughout the course of these episodes from season one, but to continue to encourage you to do what you need to do to tend to those wounds. Um, and yeah, I just wanted to throw that in before anyone answers the question you had. It was just on my heart, so I didn't want to forget. So just threw that in, and I'll pause right there.
Hugh, did you
I
have any thoughts to what Nikki just shared before we dive into the question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again. I know, we're not all doom and gloom, but we are doom and gloom. So thank you for sitting with us and exploring this with us, and sitting with yourself and understanding yourself, and coming to terms with you and embracing you. And so thank you. This hasn't been necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's something that can be done. You can really embrace those wounds, I'm very, again, I'm just thankful that y'all are on this journey with me, and the listeners are on this journey with me. So thank you.
Yeah. We just appreciate everyone, and I think that this journey is just not exclusive to us, but is also inclusive of our listeners. And I know that we've been talking about feedback that we've been receiving just periodically throughout the season, and I wanted us to just talk a little bit about that, to include some of our listeners into the pouring into them as they are pouring into us. So I want us to go there for a little bit of time to glean on some of the feedback that we received as a result of this podcast. Nikki, did you have anything to share on that? Just any thoughts on what may have been shared just through our social media channels, or just from, or even Hugh too, what people have been talking about, or feedback that we've been receiving just from the podcast and our
Mhm.
episodes, or any insights from that?
I can tell you, from people that I know, they really love that I know personally, listeners that I know personally, um, who I always, I have, make sure I always have this honest relationship with the people closest to me. And that's something, again, had to learn to do, um, or had to not learn to do, but learn to be able to rebuild that trust in my relationships. Um, the feedback has been extraordinary. It has been my family and friends, my friends specifically are very, very, one of my friends said that he thought, maybe the podcast might be doom and gloom. Like I was saying earlier, but he was able to really absorb it. He was able to really sit with it. He was able to really digest it and to learn and kind of start his own journey. And so the feedback I've been getting has been, it has been different. I actually want to say it's different. I didn't want to say that I thought it would be all, I didn't think I'm not going to lie and say I thought, I thought we'd be getting pitchforks, right? Like, and to be honest, like, and I was like, as he said, it takes a lot of courage to do this. And I was going to do it anyways, damn it. But the fact that, you know, it's, we're getting feedback that people can really relate to these experiences in our people in my own life can really relate to the experiences that we're sharing on the podcast and that y'all have been sharing is very, very, as I said, extraordinary to me.
Yeah, that's some good feedback, Hugh. And I know particularly, like I already shared, that was um, one of the most impactful episodes was the church hurt versus religious trauma for me personally. But I got feedback around the time that episode dropped, the part one and part two. And a lot of people were grateful for that particular episode because many did not know the difference. Um, like I said earlier, in our community, we just hear church hurt, and people think that it's just a little something to get over. And so people were grateful for the distinction and being able to explain the differences and how those terms are used and the importance of understanding, naming it correctly, and how when we don't, it can make or break whether we get to safety or quote unquote remain in a situation where it's actually abusive. And I know for us as a people, oftentimes, those suffering messages have really done a number on us. That when there's abuse and we spiritually bypass it and just call it church hurt, psychologically, we've been conditioning ourselves to endure the abuse and endure the mistreatment. Um, and so we don't speak up about it. We don't speak out about it. We think that this is what we're supposed to do. We're just supposed to suffer and suffer and suffer, and that suffering pleases God. And so many of us have been conditioned to endure it. And so when we explain the differences and show what it looks like when someone's been experiencing that abuse, people are like, whoa, I didn't know. And it's a big difference. It's a difference from like getting a laceration, because you stepped on a nail or something like that versus someone, breaking their ankle or something happening where you have to have major surgery. And so being able to expound on the distinctions for a lot of feedback that I heard, social media and personally, that episode specifically was good. And then the coping mechanisms. One of my friends, he's an avid listener to the pod. Um, Reached out to me, I think a week or so ago, and said, "Wow, Nikki, that episode was really solid. Have to re-listen to it because there were a lot of different things that I was able to realize, like, wow, I didn't know I was coping that way." And again, this is why the podcast exists, because can people go to Google and now we have Chat GPT and look these things up and learn what they need to learn? Of course. But 2023, people are busy and sometimes it's easier. I mean, obviously, this is not a substitution for therapy or those type of services, but sometimes it is a resource for people to just learn some of these things and hear from survivors who've experienced similar things. And so I know from what I've heard, and then on our social media platform, many people have been grateful and thankful for the different topics that we've had on the Instagram and also in the Facebook group. So we're appreciative for for the feedback. If you've been a listener and you say, "Hey, Nikki, Jonathan, Hugh, I haven't shared anything yet, but I really appreciate the podcast." I mean, you can always reach out on Facebook, even if you're not part of the group. We do have a Facebook page, and or you can send us a DM on the Surviving a Black Church Instagram account, and we would love to hear from you. Or if you have some topics that you're interested in for season 2, you can do that as well. But we, definitely would love to hear some of your feedback. Even if there's some criticism, that's okay too. But we just like to hear from you and see how it has impacted you. Like Hugh asked earlier, what has this podcast been for you? What has it done for you? So that we can, increase ways to support and serve this community. So that's what I got, Jonathan.
Yeah, very good. The only thing else I wanted to add, which is also very important, is that in terms of just listener feedback, I know that when we first started this podcast and I started posting some of the links, there were some people who were like, "Surviving the Black church? Are y'all trying to come against the Black church?" And it was almost like this fear that was immediately kind of just looking at this podcast as a means of like coming against the Black church and really speaking negatively about the church and saying that, well, there's all churches that have some form of abuse or trauma or some type of negative experience. And I think after listening to the episodes and what it was that we were talking about, it was very clear in what we were doing that we were not bashing the church. And I think that is almost assumed that because the title is Surviving the Black Church, that we're trying to jump on and we're going to talk about the Black church, we're going to talk about try to expose people and all of that. And we didn't do any of that. Like, we didn't do any of that in this season. And I think that just like we were talking about in the previous episode about how the Black church has served as a source of strength and resilience for some people, but also been a source of trauma and oppression for a lot of Black people. And how we are offering a balanced perspective on how these religious institutions in the Black community can lead the potential for harm as well as healing. And so offering that balance in the conversation is something that I feel like we've achieved, and also receiving feedback from listeners in that people were saying, yeah, I thank you. I'm grateful for you not, talking about the Black church in and of itself, but really talking about the behaviors and the effects and the harm, so that we can really have more authentic and honest conversations and more balanced conversations about the impact of religious trauma. And I think that it has also opened up the door for us to have more specific conversations, because we didn't really cover a lot of things that are occurring just within the church, but also outside of these religious institutions and these communities, very specific topics that affect people, and which would bring even more listeners into the conversation around religious trauma. And I think that there's just been a very positive reception that I feel like we've been receiving as a result of doing this podcast and this season, and not just from survivors, but also from people that are in the professional communities, from teachers, from therapists, from practitioners, people who are listening to what it is that we're offering and using this information as a means of helping people. I know one person reached out to me and was like, "Can I send your one of your episodes to one of my clients?" I was like, "Sure." And the client told my peer or my colleague, that it helped him out so much because we were on the podcast talking about a particular topic, and the client resonated with so much that was shared in the episode that it led him to really start healing in some ways. So she was very grateful that I was able to share this resource to her. And so that's just kind of gives us more ammunition to really continue this conversation and continue to add and build upon, you know, the resources that we're bringing into this podcast, but also the feedback and the guests and listeners and other resources like networks and all these things, so that we can make sure that people have the support that they need in order to resolve and recover from these adverse religious experiences, and actively get involved in recovery and healing, and making sure that some of these abuses and some of these traumas can be prevented. And so it validates what we're doing when we hear from listeners and people who are supporting, friends of the show, people who are supporting what we're doing, because it just keeps us like, okay, we're on the right path. We're doing what we need to do, because there's so many people in the world who have gone through this. Like just you, Nikki, in the beginning of the episode, you were talking about how there's listeners from all over the world that are just tuned in to what it is, the content that we're offering. So I just appreciate all of the feedback, and it just helps us to keep going and keep building this out so that we can provide more resources to the community. And so I just want us to kind of come to a close and wrap up, and give another question just to wrap up this final episode. What do you guys think that people can do, or they can how can they support themselves or those who are experiencing religious trauma or religious abuse? And how can the listeners take this material that we're providing and contribute to raising more awareness and fostering understanding around this issue? What do you both think that could be done here?
I think the listener can do the work for themselves and tell other people to do the work for themselves. You know, have our podcast as a resource to help you do the work for yourself. And yeah, I think they could, I would love if they did this. I truly would. I would adore it if they were to spread this, just spread it to their friends, to their family, to the people they know and trust, and to the people that they know will benefit from this. So I invited you into our home, or my home. I went in y'all's home, and we want to come into your home, and we want to be able to be there, to be a part of your lives in a way that you feel seen, that you feel heard, and that you feel validated, and that that you deserve to be loved, you deserve to be respected, you deserve recognition, you deserve. God would want that for you. And so know that God would want that for you. I know that God that would want that for me, And so I'm doing a lot of this episode has brought up so much to the surface for me, and I'm so just spread it. Just spread this, because it's a resource that is missing from so many people's lives, but it's affecting so many people's lives. And so let's just be that link, right? And let's go there, and let's do something, and let's not if only for ourselves first, right? And then we can come together collectively, and we will be able to. I think we will be able to forge a way where Black people can actually be safe in a world, and we save ourselves and nobody else, and focus on us collectively.
Yeah, I love that, Hugh. Especially the part about um, encouraging people to share the podcast with others. This is not about any notoriety for us. We've already talked about the why behind the what, why we do this, but for a resource, I think that's amazing, Jonathan, that, you know, a therapist was able to share this as a resource for one of their clients. Or, Hugh, how you talked about, one of your friends was able to listen and give feedback. This is for awareness. This is for supporting survivors of religious trauma. So, as you continue to walk on your own journey and you come across others, don't hesitate to share this with them, to share the Facebook group, to let them know season 2 will be coming, soon. And that, as Jonathan says all the time, you're not alone. That there is resource and help out there. But for those who are just saying, hey, I'm still on that journey, just reminding you, and I'm pretty sure what I will share now, we've said in different forms and fashions throughout the episodes, but, recognition that this has happened, recognition and awareness about the abuse that you've experienced, is key. Choosing to see, as I would say, so that you can actually start to move through the effects of religious trauma on your life, and understanding that the recovery process is a process. Some of you, a lot of things have been awakened. A lot of realities have been shown to you throughout this first season. And you're like, okay, what do I do now? You keep learning, you keep educating yourself, you keep giving yourself grace when you figure out something that you didn't see before. You keep being compassionate towards yourself, trying not to be harsh and judgmental, and with terms that come out of our inner critic, like, oh, you should have known this, you should have known that. We didn't know, we did not know, and we're learning now. And as you learn, remembering to be kind to yourself, because at the end of the day, the reality is we've experienced some of the most horrific and unjust types of abuse in the name of religion, in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, in the name of spirituality. That is not something that you easily just walk through and, okay, went to a few sessions with a therapist, it didn't work, okay, forget it. It's not happening fast enough. It's a process. So be patient with yourself and give yourself time to heal, especially with something as complex as religious trauma. And I've said this before. I know we have not done an episode yet on what it's like when you realize, you know what, I need to exit this type of community. We will touch some of that in episode 2. But if you're in that place and you say, Nikki, now that I've been listening to all these episodes with you all, I'm realizing what I am in, the church I've been in for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, it is in fact abusive. I've been dealing with it for a long time, but you all named it and I see it for what it is. I would encourage people, perhaps, if you are able, to pause on returning to that environment. Pause even on looking for another one. It's almost like if you were in a relationship romantically with a partner and you decided to leave that relationship, would you jump right back into another relationship, or would you pause and reflect and really start to understand what you experience and make sense of it so that you can avoid being in another community where there's potential abuse and trauma around the corner. So, knowledge in and of itself is not full recovery. A lot of what we talk about is just the starting point. But it is definitely a big component to understanding and possibly prevention in future communities. So, just being patient with yourself. If you have one person in your life that actually you can talk to about this and they understand, continue to pull on support from them if they're able, and to remind you that you're not alone. And be open to continuing that journey of unlearning some of the things that you've been taught, maybe in your family or even within your church community, and realizing that recovery looks like learning some new things about how you cope, about yourself, about God, about others, about what community looks like, what healthy community looks like, what a healthy relationship with religion or spirituality could possibly look like for you. So being open in that process. And again, like we talked about last week, if you need further support connecting with a mental health professional or a coach or someone that has expertise and have possibly experienced these things and are able to be a resource for you. So, we're just pausing. We'll be back, but we want to, continue to encourage you to, just because we're pausing, don't you pause on your recovery. Keep doing what you're doing to help support yourself, and we are here for you. If needed, like I said, feel free to DM us on the Instagram page, on the Facebook page, and we look forward to connecting with you soon for season 2. So that's some of the things I got, Jonathon.
Very good, Nikki. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up this podcast episode, our final episode, and just echoing what everyone else has shared. I just want to repeat it again, and just know that it's important to consider the broader impact that we've made through this season, and that we continue to make through the Surviving Black Church podcast, and the potential for continued change over time. We talk a lot about solutions in the Black community. Having conversations like this is a solution. And what conversations do, and the conversations that we've had before, during, and after our work together, we are shedding the light. We're shedding the light on the complexities, the nuances of religious trauma, particularly religious trauma that affects Black people, African Americans in the Black church. What we've done is create a platform for educating, bringing awareness, creating dialogue, healing and restoring people, human beings. And by raising this sense of awareness, heightening this awareness, we are challenging the societal norms. And also just fostering a sense of clarity and understanding amongst our listeners from all diverse backgrounds, from all walks of life, from all over the world. And just like Nikki said, it's important and crucial that we do not view this episode as the end of our work, as the end of the podcast, as the end of our conversation, because our work doesn't stop just here. It doesn't stop here. So I encourage those who are listening to go back through the episodes again and reflect upon the lessons of the gems, the stories, the encouraging words that have been shared amongst us as your co-hosts, and all the information that you can glean upon throughout the season, and just consider how they can actively contribute to you as a survivor and support you throughout your life as you work on healing, within yourself and within your own communities. And so before we close this episode, I just want to extend my deepest, deepest, deepest gratitude to you, Nikki G, to you, Hugh. I want to express my gratitude to our listeners that are listening to this episode and those who will continue to listen to it and those who are listening to it in the future, and everybody that has been part of this season along with this podcast journey. Because without your support and your encouragement and your engagement, we probably would not do it the way it's being done today. And it has been invaluable. All of the information through participation, feedback, anything you could provide, comments on the Instagram posts. We appreciate all of it because it's helping us to create this ecosystem where we can continue to make a meaningful impact on the lives of the survivor and those who will come after the survivor for many generations to come. So we say goodbye, but not farewell. And remember that healing is possible. Like Nikki said, like you said, reach out to support. We have networks, we have community, we have supports, we have therapists, organizations that specialize in religious trauma, coaches specializing in religious trauma. There's assistance, there's support, there's help. Remember that your voice matters, your story matters, and you're not alone. You're not alone in your struggles. There are more of us out here, and there are more of us doing the work. So thank you for joining us on this journey. We are breaking the chains, y'all. We're breaking the chains, y'all.
Yes, yes,
We're
yes.
healing. We're healing. We're breaking them. We break free. Break free.
Yes.
So until we meet again, till our next appointed time, take care of yourselves. Take good care of yourselves and each other.
Yes.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Surviving the Black Church podcast with your hosts, Jonathon, Nikki, and Hugh. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Until next time, take care.